Welcome back to Talk Africa, and let's continue with our discussion. Still with us, we have James Shikwati, Churchill Ogutu, Mishek Mutize, and Professor John Gong, and also our audience of experts and students from the University of Nairobi.
Right, so Professor Gong, let's talk about South-South cooperation, because it has gained momentum with initiatives like the BRICS grouping and the Belt and Road Initiative. Talk to us about the opportunities these partnerships offer for Africa, particularly in terms of alternative financing, trade diversification, and reducing dependence on Western-controlled institutions.
You know, we are increasing in a world that the global South cannot rely upon the global North, I would say. You know, United States is drawing from this rules-based international order. You know, you barely see much investment from American companies in Africa these days. I think we are entering into a new world. And also, we have to keep in mind that, you know, I'm speaking from China's perspective, China always regards itself as part of the global South. And no matter part of the developing world, no matter how much, you know, this country's economic development has reached. Mr. Deng Xiaoping, you know, the former leader of China, who actually adopted the open door policy and adopted reform, started the reform era, had a very famous saying that China always sides with the developing world. So I think, you know, as we can all observe very easily, that China is increasing its investment on the African continent with, you know, infrastructure projects, as well as, you know, bringing manufacturing operations into Africa. I think, you know, what's happening in China right now is that there's a increasing pressure, you know, to move some of the manufacturing out of the country, not just because of the, you know, economics, fundamental economics at work, in which, you know, China is seeing rising wage levels, rising costs, and all these things, but also as a result of, you know, geopolitical play from Washington, the tariff strategy from Washington. So I think there's a general trend towards, you know, these manufacturing activities moving outside of China. Where it's going to go, I think Africa is a very good place. I think I would even argue, especially East African, you know, English-speaking East African countries. You know, I think, you know, if you're talking about economic development, South-South cooperation, there are these opportunities, I would say.
And let's talk about financial integration and even financial sovereignty when it comes to African countries. Maybe tell us, James, how does this come in when it comes to investments and sustainability, infrastructure growth, technology development? How exactly can we leverage on South-to-South cooperation?
I think under the current situation where we've seen United States of America slapping tariffs to virtually all countries all over the world, it gives Africa an opportunity to leverage on what I'll call what we've seen China offering as a predictable partner. Because right now, United States, which has always been the predictable to go to country, seems to be not predictable to Africa. So I think we can start building from the fact that China has shown it's predictable at the moment. And therefore, we can build a narrative that the South can offer a predictable alternative. And narratives are important because it's a narrative that will give the global South the confidence to wade into the unfolding new global order. And building onto that, we already mentioned that we have a deficit of infrastructure if we want to engage in matters related with trade, and especially continental free trade area. We can leverage on the fact that China is good at delivering infrastructure and task China to deliver the infrastructure. Then let's talk about the cost of this delivery. And then we can look at the fact that whether emerging or industrialized country, in all their strategic plans, they have Africa in mind. Why? They want to get our mineral resources. They are looking at our population come the year 2100 as a potential of a big market, 4 billion people, youthful people. So if we leverage on our areas of strength to negotiate, I think we can open up the intra-Africa infrastructure challenge, which will eventually, of course, tackle the issue we are raising on financial architecture.
So let me come to you, Churchill, on that question of leadership. And we've heard about the complexity of getting regional policy adoption by virtue of the fact that the continent is so vast. Even with a reformed or an alternative financial system, the quality of leadership is key, and there must be political will. So what kind of leadership is needed if Africa is to push through, its African economic independence?
I think at the heart of it, we need visionary leadership. Remember that we have the AU, the 2063 agenda that is right here ahead of us. But I find that for most of the countries, as was earlier mentioned, this short-termism that tends to come by. As each and every political regime comes in, they have their own sets of campaign agenda, which sorts of detracts them, even within their own internal economic blueprints. We have quite a number of countries following that, and also those feeds into the African Union 2063 agenda. So I find those, without a lack of visionary leadership, it detracts us from achieving those. And then in terms of regional cooperation, you find that, yes, these different leadership styles across the continent. Case in point, you look at the Sahel region, the West African bloc, you find that they are within the ECOWAS bloc, so they are trying to form some form of regional integration, but then you find that this coups that happens, so it disintegrates even the kind of regional integration that is being pursued. And even regionally, other places, it's not as volatile as what we are seeing in the Sahel region, but also within other calmer regions, we find that there isn't that unified kind of visionary to achieve that particular agenda to be able to be unified, and that goes back towards the lack of the vision. Tends to be a bit distracted. People are mistrusting each others and yet their neighbors. So those are the things that are derailing Africa as a whole to be able to achieve this kind of the leadership that we desire, that cannot be able to take us forward.
So Churchill, even when we talk about alternative sources of funding and money management, there's always a question of whether African countries are able to pay back that money. How do we make sure that the funds are well managed and that African countries will have the capacity to pay back the loans? And
this is coming on the back of some of the defaults we've seen on the continent. We saw Ghana, Zambia defaulting, but at least they've been able to restructure those debts. And right now, Ethiopia, the restructuring is still ongoing. So it's quite timely conversation around how African countries are able to service their debts. On the short term, we've seen that they are employing what you call a number of debt management solutions. Case in point is what we call liability management strategy operations. So they have this high refinancing needs that is coming up on the short term. So it's pretty much kicking the can down the road by just employing some new debt to replace this debt that is coming due. So that's what we call liability management operations. So a number of them are doing that, but on a more durable manner, at least to reduce the debt burdens. So at least they need to look at their macroeconomic environment. More so on the external debt, they need to improve their exports so as to be able, because you have external debt, but you need to service the external debt, but you are generating revenues in local currency. So you need that exports, at least you get external revenue to be able to service the debt or increase your level of foreign exchange reserves. More fundamentally, it's now just to ensure that your growth is more sustainable, so that it increases your debt carrying capacity. So those are on the more long-term, on a more long-term basis, but on short-term, liability management operations are being conducted.
Right, so we're going to take a couple of questions from the floor. Let's start with the lady at the front.
My name is Sylvia from the University of Nairobi, and my question goes to James. Even as African countries are looking for alternatives, do you think, or would you say that some of the geopolitical relationships that African countries have with foreign countries, do you think they influence whether we will go for these alternatives?
Yes, geopolitical relationship influence the types of strategy a country or a region takes. But Africa is not unique. Even other countries, other regions also are influenced by geopolitical forces. So the point is to leverage to our own interests. Now we've seen, for example, the tariff war. How can Africa leverage on that tariff war to create its continental free trade area to accelerate trading within? We are talking about now the financial system that's mostly Western dominated. Of course, geopolitical interests are here at our doorstep, but how can we leverage on those interests to grow our own system? And that's where we're talking about the need to go south-south, the need to leverage on BRICS system, the need to open up for other players. For example, bilateral players that I gave an example of China that are very good with infrastructure development. So the point is not run away from geopolitical influence, but to study it, to understand it, and leverage on it so that you address the interests of Africa.
Let's take another question.
Yes, my name is Ogebo Isaiah. Why can't we as Africans expand our CFTA by actually trading within the continent, where we will build as a good supply chain for the Africa, which will lead to reduction of dependency rate on the Western market, financial market.
Dr. Mutize, how can we expand CFTA?
It starts with the political will to do that. And I think we have that consensus politically that there is need to drive the growth of African markets in all shapes and forms. And when that happens, then it comes to the deliberate action to create the regulation platform, the frameworks that will solidify or put some parameters on how that could be done. Because that's also one of the main leverage that investors will look at if there is deliberate a legislative and regulatory framework to ensure that there is accountability if things don't go the way that they expected. So once we have that deliberate framework, which at the moment a few countries has in place to be able to sustain the kind of a market in terms of the financial ecosystem that we envisage according to the international standards. So once that is in place, then it creates the kind of confidence which you might want to call trust or credibility that international investors then feel comfortable to bring in money into that environment for medium to long term.
All right, so we're going to get final comments from members of the panel. Let me start off with you, Professor John Gong, as you make your winding up comments. Some of the critical measures that you think Africa should be looking when seeking alternatives for financing.
Well, I think at the end of the day, the solution to this big problem is that should rely on yourself. I think, this is the most reliable solution. I think, intra-Africa cooperation is very fundamental. And I think there's a lot of room to develop in this area. And I think it's also very important to work with other countries in the Global South community to attract investment, to attract businesses, and develop an economy that's geared towards growth, geared towards exports, geared towards human development.
Dr. Mutize, very briefly.
Yeah, I think it's impossible to talk about, completely removing ourselves from the international financial architecture. We are part of it. We have to keep on pushing for reforms in the current system whilst we're developing our own institutions that will be able to fill in the gap when such a reform happens. Reforms in the structure of the IMF and the World Bank, as well as the leadership of such institutions, and also, the issue that I've mentioned on special drawing rights. Those are low-hanging fruits that if there is willingness to reform, it should be accommodated.
All right, James, you have the final word.
I would say that first is to have the situational awareness that those who benefit from the status quo are not just going to accept it to go away in Africa's favor. So whatever we do is to, of course, leverage on the existing, but try to create more space for other actors so that there's competition that can then lead to the desired results from the existing financial institutions plus the new ones that are emerging, because as the world is showing us, we are not going to be stuck with the Bretton Woods institutions as we go forward.
What an insightful conversation. It's clear that while Africa faces major hurdles, there are bold ideas and homegrown solutions that could reshape its financial destiny.
The question now is, will the world listen, and will African leaders rise to the challenge?
And that's all we have time for on this special edition of Talk Africa, co-produced with TV47. A big thank you to our guests, James Shikwati, the founder of the Inter-Region Economic Network, Churchill Ogutu, an economist of IC Group, Meshach Mutize, the lead expert on support to African countries on credit rating agencies, Professor John Gong, a professor at the University of International Business and Economics. Also, thank you to our audience of experts and students from the University of Nairobi.
And remember, you can be a part of this conversation through our social media platforms on Facebook and X. And you can watch this and other editions of Talk Africa on our YouTube playlist. Do join us again next week for more Talk Africa.
I'm Hibak Said from TV47.
And I'm Beatrice Marshall from CGTN. From all of us here, thank you for watching and see you next time.